Welcome to Packaging Experts Tell All. This show takes place the third Tuesday of the month. The purpose of our show is to provide stories, examples, and tips to help you buy packaging better. I'm your host, Sarah Scudder. I'm a growth strategist and help B2B tech companies with their marketing. I oversee marketing for Real Sourcing Network. We are focused on helping companies make their packaging more sustainable. Each show, I pick a different packaging-related topic. Today, we are talking about food packaging. The global food market size in regards to packaging is expected to reach $456 billion by 2027, expanding at a compound annual growth rate of 5.2% over the forecast period, according to a report recently published by Grand View Research. So why all this growth? I think it's an increase in demand for convenience food products due to a change in lifestyle and alternative eating habits because of COVID. Some of the biggest food packaging trends I've observed this year include sustainability, personalization, storytelling, transparency, and make it smarter. To kick off the discussion today, I'm going to have each panelist share a favorite food packaging example. Our panelists have spent years in the packaging industry as buyers, consultants, and manufacturers. We love for this to be interactive with the audience, so please share in the comments where in the world you are joining us from today. And please don't be shy. We also want you to share any food packaging comments or questions that you have throughout the entire show. We'll do our best to engage and make sure that we answer the questions that come up. So please use the comments as frequently as you would like. So Dana, I'd like to kick it off with you today. Would like to have you introduce yourself, share something fun that you've done this summer, and then a favorite food packaging example and why it's one of your faves.
Sounds good. So Dana Welder, Director of Purchasing or Procurement, been in the industry 20 plus years. As far as something fun I did this summer, I don't know how fun it was, but I went to Arizona to move my son into his first apartment at ASU. So moving in the 115 degree temperature wasn't exactly fun, but it was a significant event that happened this summer. Other question, I guess, as far as favorite packaging, I have I like packaging that I think is, I love packaging that's creative and interactive and, can be repurposed. So I kind of brought up a couple examples here if you want to pull them up, Sarah. Oops.
Alrighty, let me get these pulled up here. And
so I think, particularly in some of the snacking categories, you've seen some really fun, some of these may not be super manufacturable on lines, but you've seen some really fun interactive designs. The Delish product there, you'll see they took the cap off and it actually allows you to pour the nuts into a little cup container. So perfect if you're on the go or driving. The other two were pretty interesting. On the top right corner, if you go back up to that slide, top right corner is a bag that they sell peanuts in, and you can actually, there's a divider inside the bag. So there's a place for your shells to go. So I thought that was kind of cool because what do you do with the shells when you're in the car or whatever? So, and then the bottom left corner with the pistachios is similar to the peanut example, that they come in a little container box of pistachios, and then the divider moves over. As you have shells, the divider moves over and allows you to put the shells in that. So I think that's something kind of fun. And then the last one is just something I don't know if it was in the marketplace, but something that packaging student had come up with, and it was kind of a little graphic of a pistachio cracking open, and then in the inside is a little bowl for the pistachio. So I just think that was kind of fun and creative. And then if you want to go to the next one, this actually ships in flat, and it looks like you need a PhD in origami to erect this here, but it's kind of the same concept of you have your pistachios in one side, and then ultimately the shells would go in the other side. So looks like it's difficult for filling operations, but again, kind of a cool design. And then the last one, this is more in the beverage industry, but when you look at it, they had the top left was a PET container that had a metallized cap on it. It's a beer example, but it actually is shaped like kind of a beer stein, or a German beer stein. The bottom left, the cores I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen those. I brought examples, but won't drink them now. But it's got the cool technology around some of the chromatic technologies industry on the labels, as far as color changing with light, temperatures, things like that. And so it just tells you whether the beer is warm or cold, but it's still kind of something cool that attracted market shares when they switched to that kind of package. The other one on the right side is kind of cool. When you get your bottle of wine, the box can be repurposed into a bird feeder, which these have sold out online. It's so hard to get, but it's just kind of a cool package in that you can kind of repurpose it or reuse the wooden carton or wooden box as a bird feeder. And then the middle one is just it's kind of hard. I know some of these are kind of hard to see here, but it was for fresh juices, and the artwork and graphics on the container, just when it's full, it looks like you're biting into an orange or an apple or a pomegranate, and then as you drink, it kind of changes to a pomegranate that's half eaten or an apple that's half eaten and stuff like that. So just think those are kind of I just fun. Like I said, I don't know how many of them are manufacturable on the line, but I just like that creative packaging that can be repurposed or interactive with the customer.
Awesome, Dana. And I just met with a founder of a company last week that's actually making reusable packaging, so big in the apparel industry. So once you actually get it, you put the packaging back in the mailbox. It goes back to the company, they wash it and continue to reuse it. So
very cool.
Not necessarily super relatable to food packaging yet, but I thought it was interesting because you mentioned you like packaging that's functional or reusable. Right. And I think it's really interesting as well. So thanks for being with us today, Dana, and really cool examples.
Thank you.
Tim, you are up next. Would like to have you introduce yourself, share something fun that you've done this summer, and then tell us about one of your favorite food packaging examples and why you like it so much.
Okay. Tim Mages, president of AccuFlex Packaging, a startup division of AccuLink that's only been up and operational about 15 months now. So fun thing I did this summer, Labor Day weekend, or Labor Day week, actually, for the first time in 2 years, actually took a vacation for 1 full week. And our 2 youngest children, their families, went down to the coast in South Carolina and spent time down there with my 2 granddaughters who are 10 and 7. And the best thing about granddaughters is they love Papa and you can do no wrong. Favorite packaging, I've got one example, which I'm a little bit familiar with from when my granddaughters were a little bit younger, and everybody has seen these. They're out on the store shelves. And they replaced, in a lot of things, sorry, hold still, what used to be the Gerber small jars, baby jars, for baby food out on the shelves. And early in my career, when I worked in a supermarket, it was uncommon to hear clean up on aisle 5 when somebody had accidentally knocked over one of these baby food jars and they smashed on the floor. These things don't break when you drop them. And the neat thing about these, you don't need to spoon feed the child. They can be sitting in their high chair at the table, and you just take the cap off, and the child will go to town and eat some very healthy product. And I was actually going to try one online, but I deferred. I won't do that today for you, Sarah. So anyway, I just think this was a neat concept. It came out several years ago. I think it's a great product. I will tell you a few years ago when my dad, who was in an assisted living home, I thought about this as a great product for seniors who he struggled getting the spoon up to his mouth as he sat there at lunchtime. That if they had special formulated ingredients, vitamins, et cetera, for the elderly, that this would be a great product for the seniors to basically help feed these poor people as they lived out the last few years of their lives in a assisted living home. So anyway, that's my example for today.
Awesome, Tim. Thank you so much for being here. Jared, you are joining us from the road. I think you had a delayed flight. I've heard lots of crazy travel stories in the last couple months. So thanks for being with us. Would love to have you introduce yourself. Tell us something fun you and the fam have done this summer, and then talk to us about a favorite food packaging example.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me on. And you actually headed to a food production facility as well. But so Jared Spencer, I'm the founder of ROI Packaging. We focus on value optimization across packaging. Majority of the business is in the food and beverage. Probably 90% of the work we do is in the food space. In terms of the summer, I like to say I'm a highly unaccomplished sailor. So try to get out there as much as possible and just really try to enjoy that as much as we can before it gets too cold. In terms of packaging that I like at the moment, one that's maybe a little bit different, it's a company called Appeal Sciences. Basically what they have is a coating that they're putting on food and fruits and vegetables to actually eliminate a lot of the secondary packaging. So it's kind of really neat, some of that work that's being done to ultimately reduce a lot of the packaging materials and use a material I think it's edible as well. So it really just gets coated during the process and shipped out with no secondary packaging.
And Jared, one more time, what was the name of the company, just so everyone can make sure they heard that?
Yeah, it's Appeal. I think it's APEEL Sciences.
All right, awesome.
Relatively new company. I think last couple of years, kind of in that startup mode, but really starting to scale across different foods.
All right, Jared. Well, thanks for being with us today from the road. Appreciate you squeezing us in between flights and meetings. Mark, glad to have you back. We've missed you the last couple months. Would love to have you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Sarah. Good to be back and good to share the virtual podium again with Tim and Dana and now Jared. So thanks for inviting me. I've been a little bit busy, had some other stuff going on, but I'm super excited to be back doing these forums. So I wish I could say I had more interesting and exciting summer plans, but we did have some trip planned to New Mexico, but due to some COVID issues that we decided not to take that trip. So I would say the high point of my summer would be taking my first business trip on an airplane to Detroit, which is wonderful. Always a pleasure to go to the D. And then I say another personal thing I did as I rejoined the gym for the first time after 18 months. So that was another big milestone moving forward personally. So real quick, just by way of background, I've been on these panels before. It's Mark Oser. I'm the president of a company called Antares Consulting Group. My background is 29 years now in the world of procurement. The last 12, I've been focusing on packaging. And a little over 6 years ago, I started Antares. The company really, in a nutshell, does three things. One, we help companies on a like-for-like basis buy the products that they're purchasing more effectively. Two, we have a team of technical experts, a PhD, polymer chemists, and other engineers who can technically redesign products to reduce the amount of raw material and make the product and the package perform as well or better. And then 3, occasionally we get called in to do either some failure analysis, why a product is failing, or just design something from scratch for a client. So in a nutshell, that's what we do. And today I bought a prop. I didn't have a fancy presentation, but there is a product that I like. It's food. And I have not seen a product like this, so I'm not commenting on the fact that it's a novelty because it's a can. But this is ultra-filtered, lactose-free protein milk delivered in a can at shelf-stable temperatures. And what I like about it is, A, what a novel way to drink a high-protein, healthy beverage. And B, I just think that these screen-printed cans really, really do a great job of telling the brand story. It's dark chocolate, it's whole filtered milk. I don't have anything to do with the company, for full disclosure. I wish I did. But what a great way to market a product. It's an excellent product and a great way to package. It ships shelf stable and it takes up very little space, so it ships efficiently.
Awesome. Glad to have you back with us, Mark. Thanks for being here today.
Always a pleasure.
So Dana, you have spent most of your career in the food manufacturing industry. So this is a really relevant topic for you today to share some of your expertise with us. So I want to start the conversation by having you talk about some of the most difficult things you've experienced when sourcing packaging for food. And if you have a couple stories or examples to share, that would be awesome as well.
I think the last 18 months or so since COVID, there's definitely been a lot of supply issues. I think issues to help mitigate some of the cost pressures, just looking for creative solves to those. Because as every company is experiencing issues with labor and transportation and energy increases, and whether it's resin or paper increases, it's just looking for the right partners to help offset and mitigate some of those cost pressures and increases, and then really who can supply, I think those are some of the issues that will continue into 2022. But I think, historically, I think it's been a lot of, some of the designs I showed earlier. Can you manufacture them on your lines? I know we've hired third-party design firms in the past that if they don't do their due diligence up front and find out where it's going to be manufactured, at what facility, what kind of line speeds, and do all that work up front, they come up with packages that you just can't manufacture, or you're not going to hit line speeds to fill capacity. So I think that's one of the challenges, as well as, when we look at sustainability right now, I think it's kind of across the board. I mean, sustainability, looking at, one of the protective packaging companies that I had worked for, we had it was like a recycled jean material that was laminated between paper that kind of went into a box. Like if you did one of those meal delivery programs, like HelloFresh or something like that, it was, help keep it was thermal packaging that kind of helped you put an ice pack in it, and it helped keep the product cold. Just that whole supply chain, and, having it manufactured on our lines and being able to run that, there's some great, cool designs out there and cool stories from sustainability, but, there's some challenges sometimes on the footprint and getting them, to your facility, and things like that. So.
All right. Thank you, Dana. I think we're going to see lots of supply chain challenges continue into next year. I know people always want to know, when is it going to end? And I think it's really kind of impossible to predict, but people need to be prepared, I think, for the long haul. Tim, you are a manufacturer, so you're actually producing product versus someone like Dana, who's actually going out and sourcing and procuring it. So Tim, I'd like you to talk about the biggest challenges for food packaging manufacturers servicing food brands, which is a very different level of regulation because things are touching the packaging that are going to be edible or drinkable. And then, so any sort of red flags or things to watch out for or pay attention to from a packaging manufacturer perspective.
Well, I guess I'd start, Sarah, when you're dealing with the larger food manufacturers, they know all the right questions to ask. They really have tested everything, most things previously. They know the types of film properties they need to be successful with their putting their product in your packaging or the packaging that I might be making. They help guide us as a manufacturer of the packaging in many of the critical needs and the wants and their desires. Having dealt mostly with the smaller brands and the new and emerging brands over the last 15 months, there are many unknowns, and oftentimes they don't know what they don't know. So in terms of the key attributes that they really need in their package. So as a supplier of packaging, I think it's critical that we ask the right questions, whether it's a flexible supplier, a carton supplier, rigid packaging, or corrugate, whatever. We need to ask the right questions. We need help to guide these companies to make sure we're meeting their needs, that when they go to market, they don't encounter problems or issues, et cetera. From a flexible packaging standpoint, one thing I think that's most critical when you talk about food packaging is really barrier properties. What's the product that's going inside of my package? Is it moisture sensitive? Does it need to have an oxygen barrier? Will it go stale? Will it dry out? Will UV light affect it? All these things are very important to ask. And as I said, when on these smaller brands, emerging brands that are just getting involved in new products that they want to bring to the market, sometimes they don't think about these things because they're in such a rush to get their product into the market. As a packaging supplier, we have to think for them and make sure we ask all those right questions. I always think it's better to over-engineer the film to begin with, and rather than under-engineer it. We've touched a little bit about sustainable films. More and more packaging is moving into either paper that's been around for a long time or bio-based resin films, which is more new to the market. I believe the bio-based resins and films continue to be fine-tuned and developed, and they are different and they do behave differently than traditional flexible packaging films. So companies need to be aware of that. And my only caution there would be to test the processing of these films in their process, test shelf life, test extended shelf lives, and move slowly and cautiously. You want to avoid any big surprises out in the marketplace with a new product and a new brand and a film that is somewhat new to the marketplace. And again, I'm talking about some of the bio-based films that are just really getting started out there in the market today.
So Tim, we had a few questions come in from the audience. I'll open this up to you and then see Jared or Mark if you have anything else you'd like to add. Question from Maynard Clark. How might such innovative and protective packaging, I think that's referring to when Dana showed some of those examples, how might that be made biodegradable?
Well, there is films out there today that we've talked about in some of the earlier sessions that are compostable, and the films are compostable. And the two film, one's a paper-based film, and the sealant layer is a PBS bio-based resin that is made into a sealant layer of film that are put together with a compostable adhesive. The testing that needs to be done to confirm that the total structure is compostable and biodegradable is quite involved. It's expensive, and there are films out there that meet those requirements. The total package together and oftentimes has not been thoroughly vetted or tested at the marketplace. But the films that are used to be put together for these structures, they meet the requirements of compostability.
Mark or Jared, anything else you'd like to add on to Tim's response?
No, Tim always hits the nail right on the head with this stuff, but I would just like to add one thing as a comment that I've made previously on your panels, especially with respect to sustainability. At the end of the day, and I think Tim was kind of bringing this up, and Dana and Jared, it's about trade-offs, right? You can trade sustainability, but at some point you may be giving something up with respect to food protection or the actual specific requirement that the packaging is going to deliver. And so until that's fully solved, there's going to continue to be trade-offs. And so I think it's an incumbent upon the buyer and people advising the buyers to make sure they really and the user to make sure they really understand these trade-offs before they make decisions, because otherwise you jump into something and you don't know if it's going to work, and you find out the hard way and you're a year or 2 years into it. So understand what those trade-offs are before you start.
We've got a question from Krishna. Oh, Jared, did you want to add to that as well?
Oh, no, I think you both make really good points. Yeah, I think especially in the film side, there's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of misinformation around a lot of those films, you know, in terms of what they actually can do in real life. So I think you just need to be careful and like I said, really make sure it's vetted out through that testing process.
So Krishna is joining us today, I think for the first time, and she's actually a student, which is awesome, and looks like she's interested to going into the packaging space. And she wants to know how important it is to study the material and packaging design. So any advice around that, or just for her in general, knowing that she's a student interested going into the packaging space?
I would just say my 2 cents is you need to know the application. So if it's going to be a freezer application, refrigerated application, is it shelf stable? Those can all kind of play a little bit into it. You know, and the brittleness of the package. If it's in a freezer application, there might be additives you have to do. If it's a resin-based package, if it's paper, making sure you have the moisture moisture-resistant additive to withstand in the freezer space. I think all those are kind of key, important things, you know, to look at.
So one other point, if I may, also when you talk about knowing exactly what's in the packaging, typically what we suggest and what we really strenuously suggest to all of our clients is that they receive what's called a COA, certificate of analysis, with each delivered package of the packaging materials, because you can't possibly know, I mean, everything. You can assume you know everything that's going in, but we like to demand that suppliers show us what is all included in this package, to what specifications it is made, what additives are included, and we want that shipped with every order. I have seen companies be very diligent about that in requiring it, and I have seen companies not be very diligent about requiring it. And all I can say is to the point posed by the questioner, I strongly urge people to really require suppliers to disclose fully what's in the product. So we can't be expected to know as a buyer everything that's in the product, but you can expect them to list it and be transparent.
All right, great. So Jared, I want to talk a little bit about testing. I know you brought it up earlier, and it's something that I hear a lot about, especially for companies in the packaging space, trying to figure out how to actually test out new packaging, because it can be kind of a challenging process. So what can food companies do to set up effective packaging testing processes? And what can brands do to stay compliant with federal and local laws and regulations? And I know that we just had Kevin put a note in the comments about the PFAS ban in packaging, which has now passed the US Senate, and this will affect most fiber packaging and many plastic packaging as well.
Yeah, so a couple things there. I guess we can start on the last one there. Certainly on the molded fiber, that's been a huge issue when that first came out. There's been a tremendous amount of progress in that space, and a lot of the major manufacturers actually have made a lot of progress and are starting to roll out solutions now that don't have that. But up until very recently, most of those fiber packages did, in fact, have some sort of PFAS on them. In terms of testing, there's a fair amount of standards out there that they can test to depending on what they're looking to do in terms of transportation testing and shelf life testing. So there's international standards that they can test to, and certainly labs out there that specialize in that space. It probably makes the most sense as you're launching new products. But like I said, yeah, a lot of it has to do with really understanding how is the product going to be used, right? What is that distribution cycle going to look like? What is the shelf life needs? What are you trying to accomplish? And then making sure you're testing to the right spec and to match the real life distribution.
Yeah, and Jared, something that I think just seems kind of obvious and basic, but it's really important to test the durability. Some of the most unsustainable packaging is packaging that causes the product to be damaged. And then you've got to reship out another package or item. So really, really making sure that durability is a part of the testing process is important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, the least sustainable thing you can do is have damaged or unusable goods, right? So you go through all that manufacturing, packaging, shipping, ultimately to get it to the consumer where it can't be used. So no, certainly packaging protection and product protection has to be paramount.
Mm-hmm. So we've got a question in the audience from Christine. Christine, thank you for being with us today. Love to see all your comments. You've been very, very active, so appreciate that. So the question is, why do we not see hemp resin being incorporated in either LLDPE or PP films? So Mark or Tim, either of you want to weigh in on that?
I'm going to defer to Tim on this.
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer. I do know there is a lot of work being done with hemp fibers and hemp papers being used in the packaging arena. I am not sure about the supply situation of hemp in terms of there's enough of it around to be incorporated in the LLDPE films, but I honestly do not know the answer to that question. That's a good question.
I've only heard it used in right now.
Yeah, I think there's.
Sorry.
Oh no, yeah, no. I think and there's some challenges when you start mixing resins in general. So I mean, regardless of sort of what the alternative material is, there's some challenges around that in general. So certainly, specific materials are going to have their own challenges, but mixing some of those base materials can actually make them more unsustainable or less recyclable as you get into more complicated film structures as well. So it's not necessarily always an improvement to partially replace materials within those structures.
Yeah, I'll add that's a good point Jared just made, particularly when you talk about collection and recycling and trying to reduce the waste stream. The more you can segment the waste streams into its own component, the easier it is to recycle it and reuse that waste stream. Once you start commingling different resins, different fibers, et cetera, it does make it much more difficult.
All right, thank you for that. So, Mark, I want to talk a little bit about freight expenses in regards to packaging. I know that you do a lot of work to help brands minimize their freight expense, which is one, more sustainable, but also can really actually help companies save money. So what can food brands do to minimize freight costs? And in particular, how can they leverage their packaging to help them drive this savings?
Well, it's a timely point. Obviously, I think everyone on the panel and probably most in the audience know what's going on in the freight world, and it's certainly not pretty right now. And when we think about freight, and particularly with respect to how you pose the question, we think about outbound freight, right? How it's going to go from either the manufacturer to the distribution center, or in many cases from the manufacturer to the customer directly. But there's also an issue going on with inbound freight that we can't really overlook, and especially for someone like Dana, who works in the major food corporations and packages a lot of food, when the inbound materials, and a lot of them, especially PET and others, are coming in from East Asia and South Asia, when the container prices go from $8,000 to $25,000, that's impacting your costs, and there's really not a lot we can do with that. So for the purposes of this discussion, let's just kind of focus on once it goes from the manufacturer either to a distribution center or to a customer. A couple of things that we work on. Number one is like the dimensional integrity, the dimension of the package. We have seen countless cases, and I can give you examples in CPG and in some cases food, where the box is literally just too big. It doesn't need to be quite as big. And therefore, when you put extra space in there, that reduces the amount of units you can fit on a pallet. And therefore, that increases the cost per unit of the freight of the product during the freight process. So what we have done to try to focus on this is really take an engineering approach to what size does the package need to be? And again, we're talking at this point, let's just focus on the corrugated part of it. How can we engineer that to take up less space, number one, so you can fit hopefully more on a pallet? We're working on something like this right now. It's not a particularly interesting food example, but it's in the truck related industry where pack density, because these are really big, thick items that we're shipping, is such a critical factor, right? You want to be able to pack more onto a pallet, more into a trailer, that we're working on reducing the height, reducing the corner dimensions, and making this thing so we can fit one more row on, which allows it, when you're going too high, to really have a benefit. So that's number one, working on the dimensions. And then number two, for products that are very heavy, right, that could conceivably weigh out a trailer before they cube out a trailer, we focus on engineering the package so you're using the least amount of raw material, the least weight of raw material to achieve the goal of the packaging. And so, historically in the food business, for example, like we've done a lot of work in produce, we would do things like taking out air holes, right? Because there's too many of them. They don't actually do anything. And all they do is weaken the package and force you to use more paper. Or we would look at things like repositioning the air holes, where in one package it's here, another package it's here. So if you try to mix a pallet, you all of a sudden have misalignment of the airflow. So we try to focus on things like getting the right number of air holes, the right location, so we can then use that added structure to basically take out a significant amount of weight. And that allows you to ship the package when it's lighter, both from a manufacturer to distribution center, and then also from a D2C perspective. So if you can maximize and optimize the dimensions and the weight, that helps you on the dim weights when you're shipping D2C. So those are kind of the things that we've been focused on, especially in the last couple of years with the pandemic.
Tim, that brings up a question that I have for you. So Mark talked about some of the things that they're doing to help their clients minimize those freight expenses. I know there's also a lot of people looking at flexible packaging. So it's something that they may not have used before. They may be using glass, they may be using aluminum. How should companies, when and how should a food company look at pivoting to flexible packaging? I think it's an important conversation, and I'm personally seeing more food brands using flexible packaging this year.
Yeah. Flexible packaging really has a lot of benefits, and I won't talk too long. Flexible packaging got started back in the late 50s and early 60s, and for everybody's benefit, that was before I was around. But it was really when Mobile Chemical developed polypropylene that they made into bread bags to replace cellophane, which was paper, out in the marketplace. And again, that was the early 60s when that came along. And since that time, flexible packaging has come a long, long way in terms of the variety of the films that are out there today, the enhancements of the properties, the clarity, the sealability, the down gauging, the barrier properties. All those things were done to help food move from oftentimes a paper package or a rigid package, and at the end of the day, improve all the positive impacts of reducing food waste, increasing shelf life, lower cost of distribution, because on a weight basis, flexible packaging is really more competitive than a rigid box or a rigid container. As I said, all those things were very positive, and they really have developed over the years. And Sarah, you are right. If you go down to the supermarket aisle now, it's, if I had to guess, maybe 60% of what you see down there is probably flexible packaging. And here's the big but today. There has come some negative consequences with that. And again, I don't want to talk too much on this, and I'm not being political, but we in America have really grown up in what I would call a disposable economy. Maybe not the newer, younger people today, but I do remember back in my younger days where my dad thought every 3 years he had to buy a new car. why would you buy a new car every 3 years? Maybe they didn't last that long, but that was the society we boomers grew up in. And for all the good things that I just mentioned that flexible packaging has done and continues to do, collectively, we haven't taken into account that these films just don't go away, and they don't go away easily. So we are only now in the last several years, and maybe even more in the last year or so, starting to take that more seriously of those consequences, whether it's the use now of recyclable films, the infrastructures to collect and break down these films, the more use or the increased use of papers again in the packaging arena. These are all those, that push is all being driven today by the large CPC companies, the large retailers, government through taxes, and us as manufacturers. And I guess the point I'm making, most importantly, we as consumers need to help in that effort. Again, if you look around the world over in Europe and you look at some of the countries over there, particularly like Denmark, they're much, much further ahead in these efforts than we are here in America. And again, I don't mean to get up on my soapbox here, but I mean, we didn't get in this situation overnight. As I said, flexible packaging's done a lot of good things for our society today, but it's not going to change overnight. And again, it is going to take a collective effort on everyone's part, all the parties I mentioned earlier. So again, didn't mean to maybe dodge the question, Sarah, but I just think it's important to understand that plastics and flexible packaging gets a lot of bad press these days, but it's done a lot of good over the many, many years that we've been using it. And I just think we've got to do a better job as we move forward to figure out what we're going to do with it once we make some of these films and some of the packaging that we're putting our food or other things into.
So we've had a few questions come in from the audience about flexible packaging. So Tim, I'll let you answer first, and then Dana or anyone else if you guys want to weigh in as well. So first comment is to Muna, flexible packaging means more plastic. How would you respond to that statement?
I mean, that's an accurate statement. There are films that are being developed today that are bio-based. The films are not made from petroleum or natural gas. They're actually made from potato starch, sugar beets, sugar cane, et cetera, et cetera. So those are bio-based films. So again, all plastics are not the same. So, but when we talk flexible packaging, you're talking about a package that is flexible, not rigid or a container or corrugate.
We've got a question coming in from Eugenia. What do you use to prevent moisture buildup in flex packaging?
Well, the first thing you have to do is the right film that has the barrier properties in to either keep the moisture out, or if you've got a product on the inside that you want to breathe, allows moisture to go out and not come back in. And there's ways to do that with development of certain co-extruded films.
So that's done mostly through physical properties, right? So it's physical barrier properties of the film. There are, I know we've worked with our chief scientist, Dr. Steve, has worked on modified atmosphere packaging that has certain chemical and physical properties that can optimize that atmosphere. But at the end of the day, that still it's not as ubiquitous as we've hoped yet. But still, I think to your point that there's the people are using the flexible films to create the physical properties that preserve the product inside, whether it be moisture or vapor or air rather. Sorry.
Maynard's Clark again. Thanks for being so active and engaged with us today. Love that. Please define the different ways that the term flexible packaging could be and are used.
Well, as I think I've mentioned on some of the earlier discussions, I've been involved in flexible packaging 34 years. And whether it's paper that is flexible and used in food service for a submarine wrap, all sorts of films that are used in medical packaging. Again, when we talk flexible, it's anything that's not rigid. Some films can actually be made fairly rigid, but in terms of flexible packaging, it's film-based, it's paper-based, it wraps around the product, it forms a pouch. Maybe the definition's too broad, but that's sort of how I define it. Mark, I don't know if you've got a different definition.
Colloquially, I say basically anything that's fiber-based, we call paper, right? And anything resin-based, we call either rigid or flexible. So if it's flexible and resin-based, we call that flexible, right? And if it's a container, plastic bottle, HDPE, something like a pail, we call that rigid. That's just how we refer to it. But I don't know if there's anything beyond that. Maybe Dana or Jared knows other than beyond colloquially.
Yeah, I mean, I use the same as you mentioned.
Yeah, historically we've done paper and resin based, and then under resin based you have flexible and rigid.
I wonder if there's a UNSPSC code for that in procurement. I'll have to go look at that. I haven't looked at that guide. I haven't looked at that in years, but anyway, sounds like we all kind of think about it in those same similar terms, at least.
And then Tim, Muna she wants to know if you have a reference for suppliers that use the type of packaging that are bio-based.
Suppliers.
And maybe, Muna, you can reach out to some of the panelists offline. And
Tim uses bio-based films.
Yes, I've used them in a few applications. I'm just trying to see what would I supply Muna with that I could certainly share with you the companies that we buy our bio-based films from. That's not a problem.
All right, awesome. I want to talk, Dana, a little bit about, we've got about 15 minutes left, and one of the big shifts that I've noticed in the food packaging space this year is so much more is now being procured and purchased online than in store. So a lot of companies have had to really pivot and start filling things online, and they weren't necessarily set up to do that originally. So Dana, I'll start with you and then see if Jared has any insights to add. But any thoughts or input for food companies that are trying to now reassess and make their packaging work better for e-commerce fulfillment?
Oh, sorry about that. So are you asking as far as a food manufacturer making our packages more? Okay. So I think they're just, it's totally different supply chains. So, when the challenge with that is when you're looking at us shipping a full truckload of product to say a Walmart, Target, whatever the case is, versus now all these one-offs, you're using there's a lot more packaging that goes into it versus shipping. I think that's where some of the paper constraints are coming in on some of the corrugate packaging, because now you're shipping to individual consumers versus these larger full truckload shipments. So it challenges the transportation network as well as, just the raw material network as well. Oops, Sarah, I think you're muted.
Jared, any insights that you want to add about food packaging companies that are really trying to pivot more towards e-commerce friendly packaging? I know I've talked to several companies that's been a challenge for them this year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So we see it a couple different ways, clients that are trying to do omni-channel, packaging that can be used both, retail and e-commerce. Some of the struggles around that is food packaging typically is pretty price sensitive. So e-commerce packaging typically adds cost to withstand those distribution cycles that are required. So some challenges around cost and the best way to sort of manage that. So to me, that's the biggest issue, is really understanding is.
Oh, Mark or Tim, any thoughts from you guys on brands that are trying to make more e-commerce friendly packaging versus shipping bulk shipments to retail stores?
Go ahead, Tim.
I got it? Okay. Sarah, many of the recent projects that I worked on have been with more of the smaller brands, the emerging brands, and a lot of their sales and distribution is through e-commerce. So they are using a flexible package and basically shipping their product direct to the consumer. So in terms of my model and our setup here at AccuFlex, we're really focused on short to mid-size runs. I am not dealing with the large food manufacturers today who would be shipping to the Walmarts or the Targets of the world, et cetera. So again, I'm dealing with more of the smaller brands. As I said, a lot of their flexible packagings, they are shipping these direct to the consumer.
Mark, any thoughts from you about brands that you've worked with that have really had to pivot towards e-commerce in the last couple of years?
Oh, hang on, I'm muted. Oh,
No,
sorry. All right. Well, a lot of the food brands that we work with have gone through more traditional channels. So they've gone through the more distribution center channels. The products that or they've sold their own products to retailers like bakeries and whatnot. So we have worked with several of them to come up with D2C packaging applications for, say, like pastries. We're just working on another opportunity with that same company 3 years later. The challenge that we're seeing right now, right? Again, what we see in our neck of the world might not be the same that everybody else is seeing, but the cost to make, especially when you're doing temperature sensitive shipments of fresh type food or food that's perishable or frozen, the cost of the insulating material has been skyrocketing. So again, we're left with sort of like a dichotomy here. You're either faced with using like the nasty, cheapest, just bubble wrap material that really doesn't particularly look good, probably isn't particularly environmentally friendly. And now you kind of look at what's going on in the direct to consumer shipping world, like FedEx and UPS, they're all having a little bit of their own struggles with reaching the customer in time. So where we're being tasked to focus right now is what can we come up with that can give someone 60 to 72 hours worth of shelf life in a frozen or highly refrigerated package. And I think right now the challenge has been a lot of the resources that are available typically with those kind of materials have been taken up with vaccines and other more important mission critical. So what we're left with is looking at sort of secondary options. We can't use EPS or foam. That's probably a great insulator, but horrible for the environment and has a bad stigma. So we're looking at companies facing unbelievable costs now to ship these products to their consumers. And I think when they got into this 2 years ago, 18 months ago, I don't think they fully appreciated how expensive it would become. So we're seeing now that they're looking to extend the shelf life so they can reduce the shipping costs by shipping it, say, second or third day. And so that's what we're seeing, this next level of focus going on. And we're working on those issues right now.
We've got a question from the audience. What do Chinese manufacturers and shippers use, and how about shippers, manufacturers in other nations? So more of a global perspective about what people are if they're getting packaging done in other countries, what are they doing and using to minimize freight expense, and also how is that playing into companies that need to do a lot of e-commerce fulfillment?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. So obviously this is the challenge with reading as opposed to having the discussion live two-way. But to the way you posed it, a lot of materials that have been used in D2C have come from Asia, right? And then you're looking at a lot of the freight costs to bring things over from Asia that used to be, like I said, $7,000, $8,000 a container, now $24,000, $25,000 a container. So what we're seeing is people are not looking right now to go to Asia. That's more of like a last resort. And there are companies, to Dana's point, there are big companies that are scouring the world to find any available package. So they're not price sensitive. But generally speaking, the freight has made a lot of categories really difficult to buy overseas that used to be common to buy overseas. That's one thing that we've seen. I know maybe some of the other panelists have other perspectives.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Mark. And I think, I think people need to do their due diligence, because there's certain categories, you really need to understand what's your current state, kind of what's your external state, and, how many suppliers are there in the marketplace, what's their capacities and capabilities, and really kind of exhaust that. I mean, before you go international, because I know, we've had suppliers that have, 60 shipments waiting on shore with the hurricanes and everything else, trying to get to port. So I think you really kind of have to do your due diligence and kind of plan out your strategy before you go overseas, for sourcing.
Can I give a quick example here of this to Dana's point there? And we had a client that was packaging like chlorine in an industrial pail, and a lot of it they wanted to get offshore. 3 years onshore, excuse me. 3 years ago, when the prices were really favorable offshore and the shipping was still affordable, that certain percentage started to move back offshore, right? Because you could still bring it in, even though they don't travel particularly well, at a much better net landed cost than you could get it domestically. As soon as the pandemic hit, it started to move back again, increasing the offshore percentage, and that takes time. But then what happened was, obviously, when the freight situation started to occur, it became all of a sudden immediately go upside down, and now they're trying to find new. So our approach is, hey, forget the pails, let's move to giant pouches, right? Because giant pouches are available. You can create the plastic and the barriers, the protective barriers you need for this particular product. Now you get into another issue, because you're talking about a big format pouch, almost like a pet food size pouch. So the number of people who have have capacity in the U.S. are limited. So we're actually doing like a dual strategy with some U.S. and then some of it we're offshoring from Colombia, where we have great supply networks down there. So I'm saying all this stuff is very dynamic, and you can look at it today and it might be a great strategy, but I think to the questioner, you have to have a diversified supply strategy. If you put all your eggs in Asia, or you put all your eggs in South America, or all your eggs in the US, at some point it's going to go against you. So we believe in this idea of like diversified supplier networks, and that's the safest way to navigate.
So we got a question from Jeffrey, wondering if any panelists are familiar with Lollyware, and if so, what your thoughts are.
Sarah, I am not, and I was hoping Mark or Dana could explain to me who Lollyware is.
I don't know what Lollyware is either. We need Jeff to tell us.
Jeff stumped the panel. We don't, none of us know, but we will be doing our research today. We got another question from Eugenia. She wants to know, for her e-commerce packaging, she's worried about her product staying fresh from shipping until it's received by the consumer, especially with uncertain times. What packaging solutions meet time and temperature challenges? So any packaging recommendations for her?
I have questions. That's what I would have. Sorry, go ahead, Dana.
I was just going to say, there's certain R values, and that's more of on the technical side that, they're going to look at, kind of the, what temperatures does it need to maintain for how many days? And, they're going to ask those questions when they design the package. And then what kind of, are you putting an ice pack in there, dry ice, different things, like that to, better understand what the supply chain looks like before they kind of design a package. But I know there's a lot of the foil film has reflectivity properties that can help with our values. And then there's, some of the thermal paper, like I mentioned, we were doing kind of a recycled jean material. And the name of the company was, I think it was Bonded Logic or Natural Blue or something like that. That has recycled fiber clothing, jeans in particular, that they do. And they make almost like a batting, if you think of insulation, like in housing, but it's made out of, jeans material. And they laminate it between, I believe it's kind of a foiled or a paper. And it's kind of sandwiched in between two And I think there's maybe a film on the paper as well. It might be paper laminated to a film, and it's kind of sandwiched in between those. So there's something like that. And then there's also kind of the foil with bubble wrap to it, that, those little air pockets in the bubbles kind of add a little bit more of like insulation to it. But I guess it depends on kind of, how many days is it when need to withstand, and, at what temperatures. And that's all stuff that the packaging engineers will, kind of do their research and have better answers than somebody like I would have for you.
So we are at time. This was definitely a popular topic. We may need to do a food packaging show part 2. I know that there was a lot more questions that came in. Jeffrey has let us know that Lollyware makes edible containers. So interesting for all of us to research. I'd love to have somebody try it out and give me feedback. I'm not sure if I'd want to be the first one to be eating one of the containers. But Jeffrey, thank you for that, and we'll definitely do some research. So I want to close out.
Okay, sorry. It looks like Maynard is affiliated with Lollyware. So.
So Jared, as we close out the discussion today, I wanted to give you a chance if there's any innovation that you're really excited about, or something that you think is just going to have a really big impact on the food industry in the next few months. Would love to hear what that is.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I'm really excited about dry molded pulp. It's sort of the next generation of molded pulp that's coming out. It's really, I think, the first technology around that's making it cost effective. So lower cost, much faster production speeds. It seems to be like a true replacement for some of the CPET and some of the other sort of historic like plastic solutions. So I think we're finally at a point where that's, as a sustainable option, is going to come in at a lower cost to really drive some of that further innovation in that space.
All right, and then I'll open it up to the panel as we close out. Any other innovations that you're really excited about that you think are going to have a big impact on the food industry in the next few months?
I was going to say it's going to be more than a few months. We're working on a paper-based material with sealability characteristics that we'll be able to manufacture into a finished pouch and go to market with. So again, paper-based with sealability characteristics. So
I think the next few months are going to be about securing supply, because I'm more concerned about supply chain perturbation at this point in time. Over the next few months, it's about getting your supply versus the ongoing testing and creation of alternative materials, which is ongoing. But I'm just saying the next few months, that's not going to be the top issue.
I completely agree with that, Mark. And even just with labor challenges and being resource constrained, it's even hard to find line time to even try and qualify alternate materials right now. But definitely something that, need to start thinking for, ideation now for when we get through this. But I think 2022 is going to be a rough year as well till we get out of some of this.
Yeah. All right. So I want to thank Dana and Tim, Jared, and Mark for sharing your insights with us today on food packaging. We'll have to go back in and look at all the comments. We had a lot of questions that we didn't get to today. Our next show is going to be on October 19th at 1 p.m. discussing luxury packaging. I've also created a hashtag on LinkedIn called Scudder Says. So if you want to get daily news about packaging, a lot of my content is around sustainable packaging. Feel free to follow that as well. And with that, we will wish you a wonderful afternoon or evening and hope you can join us again next month.